And it's very important at first not to be very discriminating about what opportunities you take. Take absolutely everything. Somebody wants to go to coffee with you, go to coffee with them. Somebody wants you to go talk to some other person who's here traveling, go talk to that other person. Like you have, it's a very big sunk cost at the start of trying to really, really promote yourself and talk to as many people as you can about what it is that you do.
Welcome to When You Grow Up, the podcast for conversations between students with goals and the people who have already achieved them. Brought to you by Hopkins Connect at Johns Hopkins University. In this podcast, we match students for a conversation with their dream mentor. Here's our student host for today's episode.
Hi there, my name is Richard Pedersen. I'm from Hong Kong, but currently live in Washington, D.C. I'm a second year at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins. I'm a concentrator in strategic studies as well as international economics. Today, I'm speaking with Sergio Guzman.
Hi, I'm Sergio Guzman. I am from Colombia. I am in Colombia. I am the director of Colombia Risk Analysis, a political risk consultancy based in Bogota, and I studied international relations and international economics with a concentration in Latin American studies at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, SAIS. You're listening to the When You Grow Up podcast.
Okay. Hi, Sergio. Thank you so much for your time.
Hi, Richard. Pleasure to be here.
Can you just share a little bit about your path to how you ended up where you are now, and what you think the most important steps in that career has been so far?
Sure. So I decided to go to SAIS because the government of Colombia and the FARC were negotiating a peace agreement. Right. And I was interested in working in the overlap between the private sector and the post-conflict. And I had a background in microfinance, but I wanted to transition my career a little bit to other areas of life. And when I was thinking about coming back to Colombia, I knew that getting a graduate degree was one of the first order of business that I needed to do to be able to land back properly. So after looking at a lot of degrees, I settled on SAIS, and I took a lot of classes both on Latin American studies, conflict management, and strategic studies that you well know.
Yes.
This to give me a much well-rounded sort of idea of all the moving parts behind post-conflict stabilization, how the private sector works, how the government works, but also how the military engages with these sorts of activities. And while I was at SAIS, I did my thesis because I actually knew I wanted to come back to Colombia. So doing a report or doing something that would actually provide me a tangible element to bring into job interviews was for me very important. And so I did a study on how the oil sector would develop its strategy to engage in the post-conflict. And so I moved back to Colombia for a summer, and I interviewed everybody who would speak to me about this topic. Getting in the door was easier than you would imagine, only because you come from a university, you come from academia. So you don't represent sort of an agenda, you don't bring anything to the table. People tend to be very open when it's an academic purpose, as opposed to when you're from a think tank or you have sort of a political agenda behind you. And among the many organizations that I interviewed was one called Control Risks that said, hey, this guy is pretty interesting. He has a similar background to what many of our analysts have, and we'd like to keep him on our radar. And so they did. And after I graduated, right before I was graduating, so right like where you are now, they called me and they said, what are you doing after SAIS? And that was my first opportunity to work in the political risk consulting field for one of the more important consultancies there is out there. And during my time at Control Risks, it was very interesting. I learned quite a bit, but I realized that there was a gap in the market, in the fact that they did not have many local clients, did not produce writing and reports in Spanish. And so I thought to myself, along with a partner, we said, well, wouldn't it be interesting to create something like this that caters to the local market? And so we did. I left Control Risks, of course, and I started my own company called Colombia Risk Analysis in October of 2018. So
Wow,
that's how I've gotten here. Yeah.
You've clearly had the decision at that point. You've had the realization that there's this opening in the market. What do you think prepared you to take advantage of that opening? It seems based on your summary of your career, it sounds like you were still fairly junior at your political risk consultancy, and yet you had the courage to, jump out and take advantage of this opportunity.
Yeah, it was mostly so. There's a very limited amount of political risk analysis that gets done locally that is not necessarily affiliated with a party or with with an interest group. And there's very little political risk analysis that gets done locally in English. And so I had, an ability to do these two things in English and in Spanish that was rare. So I thought, having the language component, being a local, obviously understanding the global context and how markets consume and react to these types of inputs puts me at an edge over others. So yes, I was fairly young when I started the company. I consider myself to be fairly young still, although that may be changing with my receding hairline. But yeah, I think there was an opportunity, and you're not always going to be 100% prepared when these things happen. But I took the risk, and this is a business of risk. So why not?
Fair point. Risk analysis, right? You made the right risk analysis. That's really interesting. I mean, it sounds like you've been in the right place at the right time with the right skills repeatedly throughout your career. So clearly you were well prepared for these opportunities, but also able to assess and identify them going into them.
And I think also the thing, so I speak to a lot of students, and I speak to a lot of people who ask me the questions you're asking me. And I tell them often, go to the country, go to the place where you want to do analysis. Because if you stay in Washington or you stay in New York, it's, that is where things happen. Yes, that is where the top minds of the field are. But you're going to be producing stuff that everybody else is producing. Opposite to that, if you travel to the field, if you go to the field and you have an opportunity to interview people, to talk to local people, to become an analyst yourself, you will cut your teeth and prepare yourself to produce work that other people in Washington or New York aren't getting just because they're not on the ground. And so that's a fundamental part of the job.
Yeah, I have to say that's come up repeatedly with several of my professors and speaking with them as well. They all have wonderful advice about how to start their careers, but also I think almost all of them really got their careers launched after spending significant amounts of time abroad and in foreign countries. I think SAIS does a really good job of preparing us to go do that, but you also have to, take quite the risk to end up going out there.
And that comes at a high personal cost. Look, some people have fiancés, some people have girlfriends, wives, or husbands, dogs. They have personal commitments that prevent them from traveling abroad. So this is not the case for absolutely everybody. A lot of people can make this decision. A lot of people don't have the same liberty to make that decision. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. So you clearly have landed in political risk consulting as your career field, an area of expertise. Did you know that you wanted to end up in that space when you went to SAIS, or did you find that space while you were working there, or while you were at SAIS, or working over the summer?
So it is a mixture of both. On one hand, I was interested in political analysis and understanding trends and understanding topics. But I was also interested in the management side of development and consulting and working with, different clients through difficult problems, right? I knew that I wanted to do that, but as my career sort of developed and got that jump start, it really allowed me to be on the lookout for potential opportunities, not necessarily job openings, but potential opportunities that I could provide value add myself, right? And I'm not gonna lie, it's not been easy to start your own company. And
I assumed as much.
Right, because when you're at a big company, you sort of carry the brand under yourself, right? The brand becomes a big part of who you are, how you talk, how you convey yourself, and how you do that also has implications on the brand, right? And a lot of people, understand how that works, and they work for a bigger company, and they have a chance to do things. But I'm also very extroverted. So I wanted to, have my own thoughts and be bold and do those things, to a point where I began to see the corporate structure to be more of a constraint than it was really, a stepping stone.
Interesting. That actually builds into one of the questions I was going to ask you later about how you balanced building your own personal brand versus trying to find opportunities where you could grow within an organization. I think you have an interesting perspective because you've clearly gone out on your own to build your own brand. But did you see that as working directly in conflict with traditional walking up the ladder, staying within a corporate structure, or did you just see it as an evolution of that?
No, so there's a number of ways of thinking about it. Right now, my brand, Sergio Guzman, is stronger than Columbia Risk Analysis. So it is my personal brand, what I built through control risk, the contacts that I made after control risks, the individual assessments that I did after the, I'm an opinion columnist type, I'm a Twitter person. So that all has fed into the seriousness that Columbia Risk Analysis is taken with, right? So I don't have a list of things that I would suggest, but it's definitely consistency. The more you tweet, the more people will notice what you tweet. The more you interact with other people, the more they will notice you. Be complimentary of others. Share. At first, a lot of people are going to be like, well, I'm not going to write unless people pay me to write, but nobody's going to know what you bring to the table unless you give them a taste of what you can produce for free. And so I got my first big break when a blog called the Bogota Post written by some expats here in Bogota. They asked me to write a weekly column. And so I started writing for them for free about the things that I was interested and I would have done anyways. Right. And then lo and behold, there have been clients who've reached out to me because they read something on that column that they were interested in and they wanted to know more and they were willing to pay for me to look into. The real challenge in this business, Richard, is you need to go from somebody who says interesting stuff to somebody who I pay to say interesting. That's the big jump. That's super difficult to do.
So then how do you, as a relatively recent graduate student, begin to build that personal brand? You talked about writing for this blog, but you also talked about Twitter. You talked about interacting with other people. What were your strategies for building up your personal reputation as a professional?
Twitter and LinkedIn are super important for doing that. And it's all about finding a niche, engaging with people, talking about issues other people are talking, participating in conversations other people are participating. And then invitations start to happen. And it's very important at first not to be very discriminating about what opportunities you take. Take absolutely everything. Somebody wants to go to coffee with you, go to coffee with them. Somebody wants you to go talk to some other person who's here traveling, go talk to that other person. Like you have, it's a very big sunk cost at the start of trying to really promote yourself and talk to as many people as you can about what it is that you do. And then that's going to begin to take hold. But it will take time. Don't expect to start your own political risk company and within 5 months, have a $10,000 a month retainer. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. But you need to start out small. You need to do things that are interesting, and you need to be consistent about how you say things. You have a style, stay within that style. You have a way of saying things, stay within that way of saying things. And then also, and I don't know how it is in the United States, but it helps when you are funny, and it helps when you also involve the personal stuff and the jokes and the memes with the analysis. And I'm not saying this should be just, I'm not a stand-up comedian or anything, but it gets people engaged. And engagement is what drives things in this business. And once you have them engaged, you can say, hey, I also do these products, by the way, right?
Interesting.
But that comes with time. That's something that you have to build. That's a relationship that grows.
So did you start building that brand in one particular area, say like Colombian government FARC relations or microfinance in Colombia? Was it something very specific, or do you just try and be as prolific as you possibly could be?
I try to have a very broad approach but I do Colombian politics, right? So people ask me sometimes to do analysis on Ecuador, I refer them to a friend. People ask me to do analysis on Venezuela, I refer them to a friend, because I am not a Latin Americanist more broadly. I am a Colombia specialist, and now I'm one of the foremost Colombia specialists, right? And so I didn't get to there by offering Monday Bolivia, Tuesday Ecuador, Thursday Peru, right? I got there by consistently talking about Colombia. Now, that was my situation. Other people can find themselves saying like, hey, I'm going to be the best analyst of the Caribbean countries. Because if you look at the Caribbean countries, there's very few people that are looking at, Barbados, the Antilles, Dominica, Puerto Rico together, right? And that's a niche that it would be worth exploring. Guyana, for instance, is another niche that a lot of people have been talking about, because Guyana has a very prospective oil sector. And with that also come a lot of opportunities, because guess what? People at BP didn't know much about Guyana 5 years ago. Now, the person who began writing analysis about Guyana is awash with opportunity, because there are more people and there are more clients that are interesting, right? So what's the next one? Nicaragua, Belize, Barbados. What happens if the Cuban government stops being a dictatorship, and there's going to be an interest of foreign direct investment? You want to be positioned at the right time to take advantage of those moments.
How have you seen SAIS's not their reputation, but I guess their capacity to churn out good analysts from the other side, from someone who's the perspective of someone who's hiring others? Do you think that SAIS prepares people for that career?
I think so. I've actually had a lot of clients in different organizations who also went to SAIS.
Interesting.
And it just makes the introduction conversation easier, because you sort of establish credentials that they know you're not full of it, that they know that you come from a background where you've been pushed, where you've excelled, that you've produced results. And so that's also always a great credential to have, but that just gets you in the door. You need to produce the material, and you need to come up with the deliverables that are of sufficient quality for the client to hire you again. That's a challenge.
So when you were learning to develop these deliverables, did that come from your time at SAIS, or did that come from your time in the political risk consulting space beforehand?
I think both. I think there were certain sort of skill courses at SAIS that I took that were interested in this, but there were also some classes in strategic studies that helped me
Hmm.
develop short memos for executives. There were also other classes in conflict management that helped me understand how post-conflict development looks like, how you should brief different stakeholders, and of course, the Latin American classes at LASP also helped me broaden sort of the outlook for other things. And look,
Right.
once you're in the ground, you look back at those classes and you say, "Oh, I wish I would have taken more of these other
Yes.
classes."
Yep.
Uh, but all said and done, it's an initial assessment of what you're going to do later on.
Yeah, I think at this point in my career at SAIS, I'm getting to the point where I'm thinking, gosh, I wish I had an extra semester to take, these 3 other classes, these 4 other classes. So I'm glad that feeling doesn't entirely go away, because I think I will be stealing SAIS syllabi for years to come for reading lists. Um,
Absolutely. And they should make them public,
yeah,
because now that you're out of SAIS, you sort of wish you had a political risk class syllabus that you
exactly.
could read from to educate
Yes.
yourself on other topics. But
And at least remind yourself. I've been trying to save as much as I possibly can. I know just in my time with The Economist, there were several times where I looked back on my statistics textbooks. I looked back on my regional studies, China politics studies classes to just refresh myself. So
oh yeah, I
I
have
think,
my SAIS library in my office.
do you
So
really?
yeah, I keep it there intentionally just to make sure that they're looking at me and I'm looking at them, and I'm like, I'm gonna read you one
One
day.
day, one
Book
day.
on strategy. I'm gonna read you.
Right, the book I was supposed to read for my intro level class, I just never got around to.
Exactly.
So then, how do you manage your personal learning and personal development from an intellectual standpoint against doing kind of the day-to-day work? I know in my experience, it's been hard to try to find time to take a step back and think about regional trends, think about global trends, how they might affect the bigger picture when I'm on Twitter worrying about the latest, public statement by the CCP.
I listen to podcasts. I
Interesting.
walk to work and I listen
Mhm.
to 40-minute podcasts in the morning. That gives me a higher perspective on different topics. There's politicology that I listen to. It was the Lincoln Project podcast back when
Yeah.
the US was in the election, and I listened to that sort of because it gave me ideas about how to understand elections, how to understand
Mhm.
election trends. And I'm putting many of those skills that I used, that I learned in those podcasts, in my job currently, doing political analysis myself.
Interesting. Very interesting. So you're taking ideas from American politics and reapplying that analytic framework to domestic
Yeah,
politics for you.
yeah.
That's really interesting. I think that certainly makes sense in a competitive political system. I wish I could apply democratic political ideas to China, but maybe
Not gonna
maybe not.
happen.
Maybe not for a while at least.
So I listen to that. Um, Twitter is a huge space where you can waste time, but you can make lists, and you can
Right.
make lists about different interests that you have and understand what people are saying. Over the last few months, I've been, in Ukraine politics,
Yep.
as
I
I
think we
think
all have.
the rest of the world is. So I know much more about Ukraine than I ever thought I would know.
Yeah.
Just because I'm just trying to understand what the implications of that are. So, events change things, and
Right.
they change the outlook of the world. And the Ukraine situation is a game changer.
Right.
And so it's going to have implications for the next 30, 40 years. Um, but we need to be early on thinking about how that's going to
Yeah.
move the ball.
Though that's certainly correct. Ukraine is one of these particular examples where kind of overnight the world might have very well changed in a deep structural lasting way. Though I will say, again, in my brief time at The Economist, sometimes we would speak with clients about a region or a country, and they would say, oh, what about this global trend? Oh, 5G. The classic thing is always, what's 5G? What's it going to do to this country's economic growth trajectory? And oftentimes we had to talk them out of that. We'd have to say, listen, like, this is an important trend across the world, but the fundamentals haven't really changed. The fundamentals still remain the same, and this is what the country's outlook looks like. How do you try to separate the hot thing at the moment from bleeding over into, the fundamentals of the region, the fundamentals of your country?
Yeah, I think that's part of the, two parts science, one part art of political risk. And the part that's art is sort of know what are the events that are game changers, right? For instance, on February 23rd, 2019, Juan Guaido declared himself the interim president of Venezuela.
Right.
And he got 40 countries to accept or to recognize his claim to power in Venezuela. And Colombian politics was awash that day with, hot takes about, like, this is the end of the Maduro regime. Like, this is, this is it. Next up, Cuba. And as an analyst, you sort of have to look at like you said, the fundamentals and say, has Maduro lost power? No. Has Maduro lost the support of the military? No. Has Maduro lost the power to control PDVSA, the national oil company? No. So how is this a watershed moment and not fluff and pump by the people who are trying to get you on this idea? And particularly during electoral times, it's very easy to just get adrift with, oh, this person got a bad poll, so no longer the president, right? It's sort of trying to calm the impulse with people make decisions and tell them to calm down, to take a deep breath, and to try to think about the implications of this for business. Because a lot of people always think about what this means for the race, but that is an analytically flawed framework, because sometimes you put your own personal preferences in that analysis. Say, I want candidate X to win, something bad happens to candidate B, and I'm like, well, that means my candidate is gonna, profit from this. No, if you consider then what is the implication of the event on my business, on my organization, on my workload, that changes you, because you have to put something practical behind that thinking, and it removes you a little bit from the political fray of, I want my guy to win and the other guy to lose.
So grounding it in the reality of the fact that you run your own business, I think, sounds like an effective strategy.
Exactly.
Well, I think that brings me to my very last question, which was, is there anything you've done, any habits you've developed, anything you've done over time that you think has been critical in getting you where you are? Is it something where you wake up every day and you journal? Do you spend 15 minutes on Twitter every morning and try to tweet one snarky thing before 9 a.m.? Is there anything in particular that you think really helped you get you where you are now?
One of the skills that a lot of people don't think it's that important, but it actually is public speaking. Being able to speak before a crowd, being able to convey points simply and succinctly, and sometimes even funny or snarkily, that gets you a long way. I've been to corporate presentations that are dull, that are very hard to hear. And when I get a good communicator to speak before that crowd is immediately, they're not glued to their phones, they're glued to the speaker. That gets you such a long way. Eye contact, pausing how you speak, not being nervous, telling a clear, consistent story. And the good thing is, you can learn how to communicate. You can learn how to be a better public speaker. It's not something you're born with, right? And so I would emphasize that one of the most important skills, aside from languages that I have, is the ability to speak in public.
Well, you've certainly done a great job with it so far. I have to say this has been a riveting conversation and immensely helpful. And I just want to thank you again for sharing your time with me, and wish you all the best with your adventures in this new business of yours.
You have been listening to When You Grow Up, the podcast for conversations between students with goals and the people who have already achieved them. Thank you to our When You Grow Up podcast student team and all the people who make this podcast possible, including our editors, Thomas Nishimoto and Josh Felton, our relationship associates, Camille Blake and Laura Flynn, our marketing coordinator, Himanshi Sharma, our project manager, Ben Stevens, our host students, and all of our guests.